The story begins with a substantial growling red-eyed creature. Someone thought it was a minotaur and asked what a B-rank monster was doing on such a low floor. It carried a weapon on its shoulder and walked directly at the group of people. At the same time, they were standing up there. A man fearfully asked Bayer if he had a plan. A man named Bayer smiled. "Yeah, sure do." As he uttered, he raised his sword with a smirk and continued to utter that he had a plan just for him. When the man looked at his back, Bayer thrust his long sword, which made a full cut on the man's back body. As he felt the pain, he then laid down on the floor and cursed them. "Don't tell me you were planning to abandon me from the beginning," he said. Bayer answered that it was evident from the beginning who else would want to team up with the miasma scavenger. His face had a splatter of blood, and he mockingly smiled at the man. "He sweats a lot and looks at them." Bayer and the other of his comrades ran out of the scene. As he forbade their goodbye, he yelled at the latter, saying good luck for stalling for them. As they continued running, the man who left behind yelled and cursed them by saying foul words. The Minotaur arrived in front of him and raised its weapon while he was kneeling. He thought, and he guessed that it was the end for him. Then, the Minotaur slammed his weapon aimed at the man. It destroyed the floor, and rocks overflowed, creating a huge hole that made the Minotaur and the man fall into the deep ground. As they fall deep into the ground, the man opens his eyes and seems confused, wondering how he is still alive. The Minotaur must have acted like a cushion. It lost consciousness or could be dead, and the latter was on the top of the Minotaur. At the same time, he also thought that it was only a matter of time until he died, even if he got lucky and no other monsters came. He concluded he was going to die of blood loss or starvation before his body was able to recover. He was so hungry at that moment and was looking to see if there was anything he could eat. He pictured the face of the dead of lost consciousness of the Minotaur and was gulped. He laughed and questioned what he was thinking. There was no telling what would happen if he tried to eat a monster. He closed his eyes because of how miserable his life was that he had lived. A silhouette appeared, and the man told the child to listen well. No matter how hard and painful it gets, the child must never give up. He recalled the time when he was a child when there was a man holding his shoulder, telling him to never give up no matter how hard and painful it gets. As he finished reminiscing, he seemed possessed. His eyes became red, and he started devouring the meat of the dead body of the Minotaur. If a human who has deflected their magic were to eat mana-rich monster meat, the monster mana particles would invade their body. To regain the blood that he lost and state his hunger, Rudes makes a gamble. The latter's eyes were glaring, and his hand started to be embraced by a black aura, which brought about an unexpected transformation. His fangs began to show as his face was still red, and his skill roared. He screamed, showing that he had embraced the red aura of the power of the Minotaur. The roaring skill is used to intimidate the opponent with a thunderous roar. The other skill was the physical boost, temporarily enhancing the target's physical strengths. His arms became so huge that his veins were about to pop, and he saw a few pairs of eyes on the dark side of where he was. There were numerous animals and creatures that started to run on his side. They were coming in swarms. At that moment, he asked who would be eaten between them, and the latter smiled while looking at the creatures. This story was about a lone adventurer who broke a taboo. The man could be seen as he devoured the monster's meat. He then crawled on the top of the dead monster. His hands were deformed together with his fingers. As he was on top of the monster's body, he seated himself, and his body started to congeal the light that shone on it. The light was aiming the wounds on his back into the deformed arms of the man that started to heal on its own. The skill of Roar was acquired with the skill of Battle Axe, which also acquired his body. It started to be embraced by the black aura. It caused slight chaos on the ground that angered the other animals and made them come out to show themselves to the latter. A diary of a certain nobleman once said devouring monsters was taboo in the world. At the same time, the animals were already coming on his side while his body was releasing a red aura. He continued to explain that for a human, to eat monsters means to take in their evil essence. He then prepared and held the axe that had a golden yellow current. He then explained the first symptom that appeared upon absorbing it was a feeling of elation that cannot be expressed by mere words accompanied by strengthening of the body. As he explained, he smashed his axe exactly at the head of the wild creature, which resulted in scattered blood around the place. He seemed satisfied by it, continued by the second symptom that brought severe headaches, nausea, and intoxication. He stopped at that moment and said that when he got out of where he was, while the other wild creature was already in front of him. The third symptom was a sudden death. As he remembered the guys who betrayed him, he would get his revenge. The third symptom is that they could become monsters after consuming the evil essence. As the man devoured all the wild creatures, the notified system appeared as he acquired the skill of appraisal, and together with echolocation, the absorbed power was also been acquired. The huge snake with dark purple eyes appeared to be facing the man who was holding and munching the wild wolf. The system notified that his agility boost had been acquired together with the lightning cloak was also awkward. The snake attacked and opened its mouth to devour the latter, and the man was quick to have a barrier using his axe and quickly released the power lightning cloak that made the place surrounded by the golden yellow power. As he finished the snake, the status system appeared and notified him that he had acquired the poison mist. And as he ate the spider palps, he also acquired the skill of thread manipulation. The man lost his mind, and he was wielding as he used the thread manipulation power on all the spiders inside the ground. He became exhausted by fighting all his will as he faced down and stumbled to get to his feet, and uttered with such power that he could get back alive. As he looked in the opposite direction and uttered that it couldn't be serious, because there were numerous wild animals who were looking at him intently. He was surrounded by it, which made him curse those huge animals and ensure he would get back home alive. In the peaceful and warm vibes of the city of Frontier in Bellona, it was a territory home to multiple labyrinths. Among said labyrinths, there was one called the Miasma Labyrinth. There was a door that opened where the air inside the slavery continually chips away the status of visiting adventurers. As the man walked inside, the pathways had fire on each side as they used to light the way. He continued to walk and explained that the other adventurers hated it, but he always visited. Before he knew it, he was being called the Miasma Scavenger. The man stopped and looked at something. He smiled with satisfaction when he saw the grass had become good. "Looks like there's a lot today, too," he said. On the 6th floor of the dungeon, the miasma grass has the effect of purifying nails, and it was also an irreplaceable source of income for the scavenger. He started to pick some of the grass and said that he wouldn't take too much. He will take what he needs. After he picked some grass, he walked back since that would last him around 3 days. The man looked back as he heard a sound. He saw 4 rats, and they were miasma rats. The rats looked wild and made trouble. It breathed out the poison. Many of the monsters that live in the dungeon use miasma and poison, contributing to the reason why adventurers don't like it in that place. The place was submerged in poison from the rats. However, the scavenger was running and thought that the poison wouldn't work against him, then proceeded to slice the one rat. His attack made the rat become angrier and attacked the scavenger successively. The scavenger attacks were hitting one another. Upon his attack, one of the rats successfully landed on his arms and almost bit his arm. As he was fighting the rats, someone screamed the fireball, making him look at who it was. The fireball attack was good enough to eliminate the rat, and it also allowed an explosion in the dungeon. The miasma scavenger was just looking at the exploded part and heard someone miss the attack, which made him look to the side. It was the 3 kids. One of them said that was why he told the other to get closer before he did it. The scavenger thought that he had seen those faces plenty of times in the Adventurer Guild and had a disappointed look. One of the newcomers raised his arms to apologize and was sure if the scavenger was named rude because it seemed to be struggling, so he wanted to help the scavenger out. However, the scavenger didn't reach the hand of the newcomer, just applauding for the sentiment. It continued that he appreciated it if the younger gave a heads up before doing anything. The newcomer was annoyed and retorted, which was why he shouted fireball. Before the latter said anything, one of the newcomers yelled and said that the miasma grass colony really was there. The 3 of them smiled when they heard it, and one said it was lucky. The scavenger was out of words because the youngsters found it and asked if they were following the scavenger because they wanted his harvesting spot. One of the youngsters couldn't believe what he had said, and he explained that they were just adventurers who earned a living through the labyrinth. Therefore, they just so happened to meet you here and save you while we were at it. Someone continued that the miasma scavenger couldn't even say a proper word of gratitude. One of the 3 youngsters looked at him with an arrogant look, the other was focused on him, and the other just smiled. The scavenger forcefully closed his eyes and bowed down while apologizing for doubting the youngster and thanking them for saving him. As he uttered those words, he clenched his fist. Outside the dungeon, the full moon shines bright in Bellona, where Rude's base, Full Belly restaurant. The scavenger could be seen grunting as if he was thrown on the floor. There was a bald man and a short-haired man inside the restaurant, and the bald man stated that whenever he was at the restaurant, the smell made the food taste horrible. While holding his cup, the short-haired man said that we're telling that because the scavenger couldn't seem to get it through his head. While Rude was still on the floor, the short-haired man said that an adventurer was someone with the ability to defeat the monster and proceeded to release his power on his hand. He continued to say that someone like the scavenger with a trash skill like abnormal status nullification wasn't an actual adventurer. As he heard all the mocking words they uttered, he became worried and anxious. He explained that abnormal status modification was his unique ability, which was useful for exploring the miasma labyrinth. However, it doesn't give him the suitable skill to defeat monsters, which is vital for adventures. He then said that as someone who didn't have any combat skills, it resulted in him not being welcome to any party, and introduced himself as the Miasma is scavenger because he always scavenges for items in the lower levels of the Miasma Labyrinth. In other words, with his skill failure, he was an outcast as an adventurer. He then came outside the restaurant and was thinking while holding his chin. He is already a grown man, yet he still has to fight a life or death battle against a mere rat. He then remembers the situation that he had earlier. He scrounged down on his bed and questioned himself if he was really going to keep living his life as the Miasma scavenger. In the morning, in Adventurers Guild, the scavenger needed to find another colony while he still had some of the money left from yesterday. He then proceeded to enter the door, where numerous people were confused and noisy inside the place. As he walked inside, he wondered what was going on inside the palace because it seemed noisy on that day. He then stopped at the receptionist and asked if there was any good request to come in. The woman noticed that he was the scavenger. She proceeded to say that the new labyrinth had been discovered and thought about the new labyrinth. It was a place filled with treasures and magic items. Even the crown necklace inside it was gold. It was a golden opportunity for any adventurer, and it was no wonder that it was noisy in that place. The woman receptionist also said about the miasma herb that he usually brings in that starting on that day, and the price would go down. He froze and was taken aback, and when he realized it, he screamed at the receptionist and asked why. The woman answered him that the miasma labyrinth was never popular to begin with, and for the time being, since people would only be going to the new labyrinth, there would be no demand. The scavenger became devastated and was sad about what he heard from the woman. Then, the new labyrinth was found in Avelio Mountain, but he wasn't allowed to go there. That made him more devastated, and he asked the woman why. The woman retorted that the new labyrinth exploration requirement was to be ranked or higher, and shows the Avelio Mountain's requirements. And he also said that E-rank Rude wasn't qualified. The scavenger frowned because of what he heard. The scavenger looked so determined, and he also wanted to challenge a new labyrinth, so he demanded the receptionist spill where the location was. The woman from the receptionist answered that the new labyrinth was in the Avelio Mountains, but wasn't it impossible for the scavenger? He then asked the reason. The receptionist holds and shows the paper with the requirements for the new labyrinth. The woman also explained that the required rank to explore a new labyrinth was a D rank or above, so Rude, who was an E ranked, wasn't qualified. He became anxious because of what he heard from the receptionist. However, he was determined that he had to dive into the new labyrinth no matter what, so he asked if there was another way. The woman said that those are the rules, and even if he managed to go, he would just die in vain. He couldn't utter a proper word, became more anxious, and almost lost his motivation to enter the new labyrinth. However, a man who passed by and heard the scavenger said that if the man wanna go diving in there that much, then he proceeded to have a preposition about the scavenger joining his party as a porter. At the same time, they looked at the man who suddenly talked to them. The man has yellow hair and is just smiling throughout. Outside the palace, the sky was calm, and a carriage appeared where the 4 people were riding it. The yellow-haired man was really grateful when he met the scavenger, and continued to explain that he wanted someone to carry the materials from the new labyrinth but couldn't get a hold of anyone. The scavenger was just looking at him, and it didn't utter a word. He thought that probably because all the adventurers in the guild were gathered in the new labyrinth, securing a partner was difficult. His thought was cut by the red-haired woman who mumbled and questioned everyone why they were diving with a miasma scavenger. The big guy, who was also their comrade, followed by saying that couldn't the yellow-haired man find something better to do. The man smiled and stopped his comrades from saying anything. He said that since the scavenger has been an adventurer for a long while, it isn't better to have him tag along instead of a newbie. He proceeded to introduce himself once again while holding his chest and said that his name was Bayer, the leader of the Scarlet Sword. Then, he pointed to the red-haired woman named Sasha and the big guy named Rick. The 3 of them were D-rank adventurers. The scavenger also uttered his name by saying Rude, an E-rank adventurer, and it was a pleasure to work with them. Bayer said that before they dive in, he would like to know more about the scavenger status and started to ask if he would mind showing him the guild cart. Rude didn't think twice and simply answered by saying sure thing. He then reaches for his bag and looks for his guild card. As he opens the guild card, it shows his level, skills, and status. Bayer just said okay and pinpointed to ask Rude if he can use fire magic as well. The scavenger explained that the powers are too low for use in Battletoe, but it sorta comes in handy in dark places when cooking and the like. Bayer seemed satisfied and created a sound while saying that was still plenty helpful, then considered that he was counting on the scavenger. Their adventure continued, and the pathways were almost numerous hills. As they arrived, Sasha and Rick were happily pleased with the place, and Bayer said that they had arrived while Rude, the same as everyone, was cheerful. Bayer said that a Velio labyrinth had been recently discovered. His comrades were enthusiastically cheerful. Sasha, holding her baton, asked, "Doesn't it look like we're the first ones to arrive?" And Rick just answered by saying, "Let's get exploring already." As they opened the door, the cheerfulness of Rick and Sasha became disappointed when they saw that it was already filled with numerous people since it was already crowded. As they walked inside, they saw the people picking the labyrinth grass and deciding while the others were looking for equipment. And on the other side, they were selling something. Sasha became annoyed and cursed to release her frustration. She said that there were adventurers everywhere they went. It was annoying. Bayer said that it seems like most of the first layer has been explored already, while Rick said, "Where aren't you the one who said that?" While Sasha was still frowning, the big guy then smiled and said they just have to dive in deeper, then there are probably fewer people for their down. By that, Sasha went back to being cheerful and agreed with Rick. However, Rude, who was listening to them, uttered that the place was a newly discovered labyrinth, so it would be better to start mapping the first layer then. As he continued to talk, he was cut by Sasha, who was annoyed by the scavenger and said that she heard the porter giving out his opinion. Rick followed that, and this was the reason why the scavenger was stuck in the E rank. Old man Bayer, who was behind Rude and stopping his comrades from ganging up the scavenger, said that Rude didn't mean any harm. He continued, that being said, he does agree with them both. If things go on like this, they won't be getting any good results. He decided that they would aim even deeper. The pathway was the way to the lower floor, and it was the new Avelio labyrinth, the fourth layer. As they walked inside, Rude encountered a wild animal that shocked him, and Rick quickly sliced the wild animal and smiled at the scavenger, saying that he shouldn't be scared of that small fry. He called him an old man. At the same time, Sasha also fought with the wild animal, and she seemed to enjoy it when he electrified her opponent. It is the same with Bayer, who also cuts the body of the wild animal. The scavenger was afraid and amused. He thought that they were strong, and he couldn't move his body and curse himself. As they fell down on one opponent, Bayer, who easily eliminated the last one, Sasha uttered that diving deeper was the right call. It sure feels nice without the other parties around. Their leader answered that the monsters were too strong and that they also found some treasure. He then flexed his point finger, which had a ring on it. Rick, the big guy, called Rude and commanded to collect the materials from the monster that they defeated as well. Rude retorted back that he couldn't collect the materials from those monsters because they were too damaged, and the magic stones were probably shattered as well. Rick didn't like what he heard from the scavenger and said, "What if they aren't? Don't slack off on miasma scavengers." Rude just grunted and remembered what Rick did to the monsters. He answered that he understands and he will collect it. When he started to collect, he noticed that the monster was all mangled. The guts and the blood were making it smell awful. He cursed Rick by saying that he really had to go that far. The scavenger raised his pointy finger and released his power and told himself that it would be better if you burned it a little than start to burn with a part of the monster. Rick noticed the doings of the scavenger and laughingly said that the old man started to burn in the monster what he was going to do to eat it. He continued that they had been exploring for a while, and he started to feel hungry even when a monster's meat started to look delicious. He scratched the back of the head while the woman who heard everything stopped Rick because he thought that it was gross. Sasha continued that isn't it taboo among adventurers to eat monsters since the manner would be absurd into our bodies, and who knows what would happen. The big guy, Rick, said that he was just joking and that when they got back, he would just use the money he had earned to buy as much delicious food as he wanted. However, they seemed to hear something. Rick froze. Sasha screamed while her eyes were closed. Bayer was surprised and afraid, and Rude gritted his teeth and looked intently in the opposite direction. The newcomer had a big foot, and they uttered no way as they couldn't believe what it was. It appeared to be a huge animal with an axe on its shoulder and growling, seemingly mad. He thought that it was the Minotaur, Bayer, who positioned himself in front, and his back was Rude. He also thought that the Minotaur was a B-rank monster and was wondering why it was in a layer that's shallow. When the Minotaur appeared, he started to wonder what was a rank monster doing on a layer that low. The four of them just stood and froze at the moment. Rick, the big guy, cursed at the sudden appearance of the Minotaur, while the woman feared the big monster and said that there was no way they could beat something like that and started panicking about what to do. Bayer yelled at Bayer, saying he would use the items, and demanded that he be lent the scavenger backpack. He commanded Rude to keep an eye on its movement, and the latter, without a doubt, agreed. The scavenger asked their leader if he had a plan. Bayer smiled and said yes to Rude. He then raised his sword and, while saying that he got a great one, then cut the back of Rude's body and made the scavenger stumble and fall on the ground. Their leader called Sasha and Rick. It was the cue for Rick to release his power, named Warrior's Encouragement, which targets become the focus of the monster attacks. Sasha throws his haste to double the target's speed. While they were releasing their powers, Rude asked them if they were planning to abandon him from the start. Bayer, their leader, proudly said that why would they bring the miasma scavenger with them otherwise. Rude sweats as he feels betrayed by his so-called comrades. As the three of them ran, Sasha, Rick, and Bayer told the scavenger that they should buy them some time. As he watched the three run off, he cursed them all. The Minotaur raised his battle axe to smash it to the scavenger while the scavenger was just kneeling in front of the monster. He looked at the Minotaur, same with the monster, and started to sway his axe where the scavenger was. Rude luckily dodged it and just grunted because of Minotaur's attack. He started to show his grin on his teeth and said that it served it right because he dodged it. Then, he thought even though he had swerved the attack, it would be the end for him, since the Minotaur used his shoulder, which has a metal defense weapon, to press the scavenger to the wall. Rude's eyes grew bigger and coughed that had blood on it. The strong impact against the wall resulted in it having a crack, and later on, the wall began to crash, falling down on the deeper layer. Both of them were also falling down together with the rocks, and that made the Minotaur surprised and wonder what had happened. As they both fell on the deep ground, Rude woke up and was wondering whether he was alive and side-eyed when he realized the Minotaur had been caught under him. He still wasn't pleased and said that it was only a matter of time for him because even if no other monsters came, he would die from blood loss or starvation before his body healed. He was hungry at that moment and said that he wanted something to eat. As he was thinking, he then pictured the image of the monster under him and then swallowed. He laughed at himself and questioned what he was thinking because eating a monster would only lead to a disaster. And he closed his eyes. What a miserable life I've lived, he mumbled. Then, a light suddenly appeared, and he remembered the old man saying the word to listen to him, saying that no matter how hard or faithful it gets, he must never give up. By that, the scavenger's eyes became red and started to devour the meat of the Minotaur, munching and chewing the meat. If a human has depleted their magic and is unable to eat the mana-rich monster meat, the monster man of particles would invade their body. In their monsterized state, it was a terrifying fate, worse than even dying due to the ingestion of poison. Rude's eyes grew bigger than their normal size, and still plunged his sword to the monster's body, and it was the reason why it was a taboo. In order to regain the blood that he lost and sate his hunger, Rude makes a regain the blood that he lost and sate his hunger. Rude makes a gumble. The small particles almost embraced the whole body of the scavenger, and thought that brought about an unexpected transformation. As he finished masticating the meat of the Minotaur, the pathways were no lights, and few pairs of eyes could be seen, and it came from the bats. As Rude walked, even though he walked slowly, he dragged the battle axe while his eyes were reddish and his fangs were shown. The bats attacked the scavenger, and he just released his skilled named Roar as the roaring Minotaur red shadow appeared. It used to intimidate the opponent with a thunderous roar. The bats were all scared and flew away when they heard the roar from Rude. He also used his skill called a physical boost, which temporarily enhances the target's physical strength. It made his hand grow bigger where his veins almost popped out, and he caught a bat that he already devoured. The bat has a skill called echolocation, which allows it to detect surrounding creatures and is effective even in darkness. As he focused on his surroundings, he heard that there were numerous animals surrounding him. He was surprised, and they were coming in swarms. At that moment, he smiled and asked which of them was gonna get eaten while he put his axe on his shoulder. The arms of the creature blasted off when Rude cut it using the axe. He was busy eliminating all the creatures present on the ground floor, cutting and slicing half of the body of the monsters. Spluttered blood after blood was continuously purging at that floor. He held his axe and thought that the battle axe fit perfectly on his hand, and he could sense the monster's magic without even looking at them. A monster from behind was about to attack him, however. He cut it well enough, and the creature's eyes were inside its mouth, and then he swallowed it. He also thought that every time he did devour a monster, he felt that power surging through his body. His body had difficulties standing up, there was still smoke released from his body. He then lifted his battle axe directly aimed at the numerous creatures in front of him. His eyes still have a glimpse of the red color, and his smile looks satisfied because of his performance and obtained skills. After he outnumbered all the creatures on the ground, he opened the door and walked outside. He stood at the door and threw the battle axe on the ground, then said that he made it back and smiled in satisfaction. The clear blue sky that had a calm vibe was like sympathizing with Rude's screams and the fact that he had survived. On the other hand, in the Adventurers Guild, numerous people were gathered inside the room, and silently watching the Scarlet Sword group seemed like explaining things to the old man. The old man in front said that after they listened to their report, he had rounded up all the adventurers who weren't in the labyrinth, except for Rude, who was with them. The old name was known as Bellona Branch Guild Master Lankars. Bayer, who was the leader of the Scarlet Sword, lied and told the old man that the moment that they encountered the Minotaur on the 4th floor, he was killed before they even had a chance to protect him. To make it more believable, Sasha covered her eyes as if she looked like she was crying, asking if they only noticed sooner, and Rick, who was comforting him. The old man, who believes their lies, said that he understood their situation and proceeded to say that moment he would prohibit entry into that labyrinth. The receptionist, who was barely listening to them, suddenly her eyes grew bigger and became surprised when a man opened the door, and it was the Miasma Scavenger. The people inside were wondering because they knew that he was already based on what they heard. The Scarlet Sword was surprised, and the old man was confused by the sudden appearance of the scavenger. As Rude walked inside the room, Bayer ran into him and called his name, pretended that he was concerned and said that he was all right. He then whispers to the scavenger that if he says anything unnecessary, he will kill him. Sasha and Rick also went to Rude and asked if he was hurt. Sasha said they tried to go back to look for him, but the labyrinth was already closed. Upon hearing their lies, he stayed emotionless, and Bayer said that they should celebrate his survival, but not in a place like that room where they were. When they pushed Rude, Bayer, and Rick looked at each other and thought that he couldn't move. Rude suddenly screamed that they used him as a pawn. All the people inside the room were flustered. Even Bayer, who was still pleading with Rude, said what he was talking about. However, he remained firm, and the old man talked about what the scavenger meant by being used as a pawn. He then explained that Bayer stole his supplies and attacked him from behind, and Rick used the scale to lure the Minotaur towards him while Sasha cast on them all so those three could run away. The three of them sweat when they hear Rude expose them. Bayer still pleaded that they didn't make any accusation of Rude. The old man said that they would clarify the truth of the matter then, and it was the cue for someone who entered the room, and it was the Truth Officer. When they knew that it was the Truth Officer, the three of them panicked, and Sasha asked why the Truth Officer, who really lives in the royal capital, would be there. The older man answered that because there had been an unusually high number of deaths among the porters temporarily joining your party, he called in an old favor to bring them here. Bayer uttered to the Truth Officer that it was her cue to determine the claims of Bayer Party and Rude, which was the truth. As she recalled all the events, she then stated that members of the Scarlet Sword were lying while Rude's claim was the truth. Bayer panicked and scared, and those people who heard the truth were shocked and mad at their party. Bayer yelled at the officer about what could someone like them possibly knew, and then pinpointed the officer. The old man was speechless for a few seconds, then said that the truth skills were impossible to acquire, such as skills in later life, and that the effectiveness of a unique skill could pass. It pictured the two faces of an adventurer. The old man continued that before the truth skills and what could be possibly more trustworthy than the worst of someone who has pledged. The Truth Officer held their chest as they looked like the truth to the plea, and the old man said that the purpose of the plea was to dedicate power to the country. His brows furrowed and seemed mad, and that made Bayer fear him. The old man stated that abandoning comrades was an adventurer's taboo. Not only that they intentionally injure their comrades, and he used the scavenger as the disposable pawns, but the three of them were reluctant to argue. The old continued that even if they continued to investigate their crimes, it is certain that the adventurer qualification will be revoked, and they will all be reduced to slavery. It made Sasha cry as she couldn't believe what she heard. Rick, with tears in his eyes, stated that they gotta be kidding and was in denial of their verdict. Bayer, who gritted his teeth and clenched his fist, thought that someone like him would become the slave and thought that if only the Truth Officer weren't there. He became more agitated and started to raise his sword when he was about to attack the Truth Officer. It made Rude, an old man, and the Truth Officer surprised by Bayer's action. The scavenger quickly runs into the Truth Officer, blocks Bayer with his sword, and says don't touch the Truth Officer, and that makes Bayer surprised. He then punched the face and made the tooth fall. His punch was strong enough and made Bayer fly at a distance, where he plunged at the wall. His aggressive punch stunned Sasha and Rick, and they couldn't look at their leader. Rude uttered that his punch wasn't that good and looked at the distance where he sent Bayer flying. After all the happenings, inside the Adventurers Guild in the reception room, the old man and Rude were seated on the couch facing each other. The old man stated that he was sorry to bother him because the scavenger must be tired. He looked at the older man and said that it was okay and, more importantly, that the three of them would be taken in by the staff. The three of them were dressed as slaves in the thinnest clothes they could wear. Sasha and the others couldn't believe their fate. The older man also said that they would undergo interrogation if it were confirmed that they were repeat offenders, so using their boarders as bait. The members of the Scarlet Sword would lose all their possessions and adventure qualities and would be reduced to slaves. The older man was firm in his explanation while gazing at the scavenger. He then closed his eyes and uttered, "But because Bayer went as far as to cause the truth, officers, he probably won't appear before him again." He then proceeded to say that they lost the rights of the profits gained in the new labyrinth, and the receptionist showed the sack of profits to the Rude and said that, in that case, he should be the one to receive it. There were about 200,000 reins inside the sack. As he was about to reach it, his surroundings became a yellow aura, and the older man pleaded for him to take it. Outside the receptionist's room, he went outside while holding the sack of rain, and somehow, he seemed confused. Later on, he thought that the rains that he received would cover some of his living expenses and hugged the sack. He imagined that it would take a while to accumulate such an amount by diligently gathering miasma grass. He also pictured where he was filled with miasma grass using the rains that he received. Adventurers could actually make good money. As he finished imagining things, he started to walk in the halls, observing some people who left a sight to him. He then thinks that maybe no one was insulting him because they saw that earlier, but that doesn't mean they will be kind, either. As he continued walking to the exit of the guild, he stepped outside and mumbled that if he stood out anymore, there might be those who would find his sudden rise in status suspicious. He guessed that he would have to continue wearing the Mia Small Labyrinth as before. He then thought that he should go and stop himself from being gloomy. He then bought himself a warrior weapon and treated himself to delicious food, since he finally got the money to get his gear ready and eat whatever he wanted. He first went to the tool shop and was amused when he saw a magic bag. When the sunsets appeared, he told himself that he would get something to eat, perhaps. The next day, inside the dungeon, a rat was cut into two, and it was caused by the scavenger. He also eliminated several rats, and he put his hand on his waist. He uttered that he thought they would be defeated easily and that he would have avoided the 5 of them just today before yesterday. An eye of the creature suddenly appeared and stated the skill of the rat, which is appraisal. He was surprised and looked thoroughly at the background of miasma rats, their status, and their skills. Then, he remembered the picture of what happened yesterday. He thought that the skill he obtained by eating the monster could even be used on corpses. He mumbled the rat's level, which was level 9, and speaking of which, he wondered about his status on how much his level had increased. As he reached his guild card, he uttered that the rat was so easy that he must be around level 20. He then proceeded to open his status, which shows that his rank increased higher than he assumed. Rude was surprised at his new level and muttered level 42 because yesterday he was only at level 7. And it was rare, so he should check the skills that he acquired. He proceeded to open his skills. He then clicked and showed that he had obtained numerous skills yesterday. He was enthusiastic when he saw the different skills and praised that because it was amazing. He then remembered the events yesterday, where the walls were destroyed, and he thought when he passed by where he fell on the way back from the new labyrinth, the wall that should have been broken was sealed. As he looked at the wall intently, he also realized that the new labyrinth would remain closed for a while, and on that day, he was just planning to lightly explore the miasma labyrinth, yet he wanted to test his new power out. Rude clenched his fist and thought that he wanted to see how effective it was on the deeper floors and also the things that he was looking intently at, so he bought it earlier. He was standing at the floor entrance and wanted to choose the right monster for his first try. On the 6th floor, he fought with the rats. On the 9th floor, he fought with the frogs. And on the 13th floor, he fought and sliced the spiders. By fighting those beyond his level, he thought that those guys wouldn't do anything to his powers, and he needed to go even further to find more suitable prey. He then walked into a different place, which led him to the 24th floor, where he saw a huge lizard that had a sword and weapon stuck on its body. He observed the movements of the lizard and opened his appraisal skill. He then saw the background of the lizard soldier and knew that it was on level 25. He uttered the name of Soldier Lizard, and they were supposed to fight in coordination with other companions. But at that moment, there was only one. He then smiled. If it was a lizard, it may be worth trying. Then, he jumped off behind the lizard, and as he launched his attack, he scratched the arm side of the lizard. The lizard was surprised and sweated because of the sudden attack of the scavenger. Rude slyly smiled and uttered that the lizard wasn't bad at this, but he wouldn't miss the next one. When Rude prepared for his next attack, the lizard ran off towards the cave, which confused the scavenger. As he came back from his confusion, he started to think that the lizard was escaping and quickly ran towards the lizard. He screamed and waited, and his eyes grew bigger when the lizard stopped, and he thought it was a dead end. He then walked near the lizard and uttered that the creature couldn't escape at that moment. However, when the lizard faced him, he saw the sly smile from the creature that confused him. He cursed afterward because he realized it was a trap. A pair of soldier lizards appeared in front of him. The pair of soldier lizards cornered Rude as he was holding his sword. He then realized his situation and cursed because he had been set up. The anxiousness was evident on his face, and even with the difference in level, his situation was bad. He kept looking side by side. The lizard had made the first attack, which made Rude struggle and lost his poise. He thought if that were the case, he would take them down one by one. As he carefully examined his situation, Rude gained some confidence and shouted, "Take this." He started to jump to the lizard and plunged his sword to his opponent. His attack made the lizard lose its balance, stumbled, and fell to the ground. The lizard felt the pain. It suddenly became flabbergasted when he saw Rude was already swaying his sword. He thought that he would end his opponent and come to the lizard's position. As soon as Rude plunged his sword toward the stumbled lizard, another lizard came and used his weapon to protect its comrade. He was surprised and could not believe what had just happened and eventually gazed on the other side. The latter quickly dodged the attack of the lizard from behind. He was surprised and cursed. His quick wits made the lizard become much more agitated. It was a close encounter. As he put his sword to his shoulder, Rude cursed when he saw the numerous lizards were just watching him, and he wondered how many of them were there. He then foresaw himself as he became surrounded by the soldier lizards. As he stood, he thought that even if those monsters were good at working with each other, using such ambush tactics and coordinating movement to that extent, he thinks that it was not since they had shown coordination before. There was a high-pitched sound that it was probably. As he turned his head on something, he was alarmed when he saw another soldier lizard watching the other soldiers to attack Rude. The protagonist's eyes grew wider when his realization elevated that it was the appraisal. Rude eyed directly at the lizard who was watching him, and it was the general lizard that was on level 32. It belonged to the beast, and it had a good status. It also had numerous kills, and one of them was the command skill. Rude found the general and grinned at the soldier. He then asked if it was the boss, as if the general could hear his question. The general was somewhat triggered and started to howl. It was the cue for the comrades to attack Rude. However, their attacks do not faze the protagonist, and he starts to use his physical boost skill. He then started to scream and ran while swaying his sword side by side. The other soldier faces him and is eager to attack the protagonist, but he receives a stump on his head. Rude used it to boost his jump and aim at the location of their boss. The general was surprised when he saw Rude jumping above him, and it seemed like the general was looking in his direction. Rude at the above thought he got the general, and he confidently launched his sword to launch an attack on the body of the general. However, he was confused when he saw the general was unscathed. Then, he kept looking at the protagonist and swayed his sword towards Rude. The general attacked with the tip of the sword and was aimed at the protagonist, but it caught him off guard since he couldn't dodge it. Rude's quick wits helped him as he used his skill named Steel Body, which made the general fail to eliminate Rude since his body became protected by steel. He smiled since the general wasn't the only one with a trump card. The general seemed confused and just made a sound. Rude watched the general and thought about what was going on because he felt the impact. Yet there was not a single scratch. He then started to examine the general, rummaging through the skills, and taught that he didn't pass a skill that enhanced his durability. It was probably someone as powerful. He began to look at the skills of each soldier and still could not see any particularly special skills. He then spotted something and saw that there was a lizard soldier that had a resemblance to the cut that he had earlier to the general. As he looked through, he saw that there was a skill named Substitute. When Rude already realized that it was the substitute skill who was taking the damage instead. He moved quickly, and whoever faced him would pierce it using his sword. He seemed mad about the substitute skills since he uttered that it must be tough being an underling reduced to a substitute and warned them not to take it personally. Rude words and actions triggered the general that created a growl, and suddenly his underlings and the general himself attacked Rude at the same time. The protagonist just looked at the soldiers that were coming from where he stood. He then suddenly used his skills named Thread Manipulation and held a thread when the general and his underlings landed. The soldiers were dumbfounded when they saw Rude above. The protagonist released his skill in both hands and uttered that all gathering together made it easier for him, and pulled the thread and screamed, "Take this." He made the thread scattered and cornered all the lizard soldiers as the thread was capturing them. They just grunted and seemed like they were losing energy to get free from the thread. The general seemed anxious when cornered by the threads, and same with his underlings, he didn't have the energy to seek freedom. The situation of the lizard soldiers seems like the victory of Rude, and by that, he pulls the thread to cut the head of the soldier's general. The cut head part could be seen as soon as he beheaded the general. At that moment, he put his sword on his back and finished and eliminated the rest of the soldiers. Rude enthusiastically uttered that it was time to eat, and a smile curved on his lips. He bought the bag with money that he got from the guild. He held the bag and uttered that it was time to use it. The thing he had bought was known as the magic bag. The space inside the bag was expanded by magic, and the weight was completely reduced when it was closed, even though he had put multiple weapons that he needed. He put his hand inside the magic bag while sticking out his tongue. Upon rummaging inside the bag, he found the frying pan and chopping board, which are his cooking utensils. He also found the seasonings inside his bag. After he finds all the things he needs for his cooking, he starts to skin the chopped part of the lizard and thinks that when he is on the hidden floor, the protagonist is just desperate to survive. But he does always really want to try those. Rude then held a piece of sliced meat while the other meat was aligned on the chopping board. He started to fry the meat and thought that it could be the meat of those monsters. He paused and started to drool when he was mesmerized by the meat in front of him, and he continued that if he cooked it properly and ate it. By that, he salivated by the look of the meat, and right after, he bit the fried meat. Rude continuously munching his food since it was really appetizing. His face seemed satisfied with the taste of the meat, and he asked who would have thought that monster could be so delicious and that he might get addicted to the taste. Upon devouring his food, the status systems appeared, and Rude acquired numerous new skills, which are one-handed swordsmanship, shield technique, miasma resistance, and, lastly, command. When he noticed that he had the new skills, how could it be so good while he was still chewing his food? He continued that it could be related to the mother powers that the monster possesses. Rude then remembered the skills from the Minotaur, Armor Spider, and Evil Eye had been quite helpful. As for the monster whose kills he hasn't tried yet, there's the Thunder Wolf and the Black Serpent. After he finished eating, the grease and oil was only on his plate. The protagonist stood up with a curved smile on his lips. On his way back, he tried to eat more of a variety of monsters, but speaking of skills, he stopped when he looked at some things and continued that the lizard with a substitute was also there. At the Miasma Labyrinth on the 21st floor, there were insects that Rude faced, butterflies and frogs. He then opened his skills, which made him blue, and lightning power was released, and he summoned the lightning cloak. His skill was directly aimed at the insects, and Rude attack was powerful for the insects. They were electrocuted and couldn't even move an inch. The skill was also useful, and he looked through his hand. It seemed like they were a pair of monsters specializing in inflicting status ailments, but they picked the wrong opponent. As he killed the pair of butterflies and frogs, at that moment, he was already holding his frying pan and uttered that he had fragments and insect dishes. That was definitely the time for. He stopped and prepared the glazing food in front of him. He then continued and said that it was fried chicken. Rude stated that the poison frog was so soft that he happily chewed his food while holding each piece in both hands. The taste of the frog's meat made him blush as he explained the seasoning reminded him of Amorphous, making him crave a beer. Upon eating, the status system already appeared and notified him that he had acquired several new skills, which are Venom, Temperature Variation, Poison Scale Powder, Paralysis Scale Powder, and Aerial Slash. As he still continued eating, he became alarmed, and it seemed he heard something. Rude stopped eating and looked inside the cave, wondering what that was, and uttered a crashing sound in a human voice. There was uncertainty about whether what he heard was right. He was wondering if there are other adventurers who have made it that are the same as him. As he munches his food, thanks for the meal, Rude uttered while still chewing on his last piece of the meat and put his cooking essentials in his magic bag. Right after he cleaned his mess, Rude thought it was rare for him to see other parties in combat and started running when he heard a voice. He continued that he might even be able to exchange information with them if he was lacking. The sword that has blood evident on it. There was a group of people that had metal weapons on their body. The man in the group had his sword pointed at the woman who was slumping on the floor. The woman was severely wounded, and it was her blood on the sword of the man. The man's comrade said it was hurt and could not believe the woman still had so much magic left. The man uttered that the trouble was worth it. He was about to help the hood of the woman's cape, and after he successfully removed it, it showed that it was a woman with sharp ears, and they knew that it was an elf woman. By that, his comrades were agitated, and the other one uttered that he wondered how much the elf woman was worth. A foot appeared, and he uttered that he hoped to make some adventurer friends. The man looked behind, and the same with his comrades. The shock was seen on their faces. It was Rude, after all, who was walking in their direction while he uttered that he didn't know the full story. But he couldn't just stand by and watch a woman being attacked. The man with his comrades asks him who he is. Rude replies that he is an adventurer who has an E rank with a grin on his face. After he introduced himself, the elf woman shouted as she warned the protagonist to get out of there because the mind with his comrades were adventurer hunters. Rude then thought about adventure hunters. She heard they were all high-ranking adventurers as he used skills to pursue their ranks and status and skills. However, he failed to know the status and skills of the adventurer hunters. As he thought, she was surprised, and of himself, did they have a concealment scale or some magic counter tool? While scanning them, the seemingly like leader commanded his comrades to take the protagonist down. One of his comrades said, "Roger," and ran near to Rude and jumped while he swung his sword. Rude is surprised because of how fast the man is, but he still manages to dodge and stop the attack using his sword. The man who attacked him turned out that Rude was doing pretty well as he stuck his tongue out, and the latter uttered that the man was just weak, and that made him annoyed by the protagonist. He pushed harder his sword while screaming that he wasn't weak. Rude was in a tight position and groaned when he felt the heaviness of his opponent. The other two of the comrades were watching them while uttering that she was going to smash Rude head in. The protagonist sighed, thought about his skills, and spit venom to the man's face. The venom was aimed directly, and it had already reacted in just a few seconds. His face was melting, and the man started to scream as he felt the pain. The other comrades were worried and called his name, Xeris. His comrades yelled at him while the other couldn't believe that the protagonist spit out venom. They saw Rude cleaning the side of his lips and thought that she was almost like a monster. The protagonist then said that it was a reckless way of fighting that was completely unlike that typical adventurer. But this was how he was a weak person who survived. At the same time, Xeris was lost and unconscious because of the venom. The leader of the adventure hunters, who witnessed all the chaos, thought that poison was a unique skill. It looked Rude and couldn't be underestimated. Their eyes were focused on Rude, and the leader uttered that they charged at him, all three of them. By that, his two comrades attack the protagonist at the same time. The one with the mask on swings his sword up, and Rude dodges it and thinks that if he has stopped for even a second, he will get killed. Then, another wave of sword attacks him. Rude moved backward as he sat to gain momentum, and a foot appeared near his head. He became shocked when he saw the latter leg was about to hit his face. He then boosted his skill and used the steel body. However, the leader had already kicked him in his face, which made Rude grunt when he felt the pain in his face. He was sent flying down into the mud. The protagonist was lying in the mud, and his enemy was watching him. He uttered that he was tough and sure that he had broken his neck. Rude then sat on the mud and gasped for some air. One of the comrades stated that he was going to snuff out Rude's life right away, held his sword, and walked where Rude was seated. When he heard the enemy's words, he started to run away from his opponents. The comrade stopped Rude from running, and when he was about to follow the protagonist, his leader commanded him to stop and stated that it was a poisonous swamp. It wasn't guaranteed that he would come out alive if he went any deeper. As he was still explaining that Rude should not be able to withstand the poisonous swamp either, he would come out soon enough. Rude stopped when he knew that he had gone away from his opponents and looked back at them. He fixed his collar and asked how long they were planning to stay in the poisonous swamp, challenging them to compete like adventurers should do. As Rude challenges the three of them, he thinks that he is lucky that he falls into the poisonous swamp on top of the usual miasma. The poisonous vapors around the swamp will also rapidly drain the adventurer's stamina. One of his enemies seemed to gasp for air and madly asked how long Rude was planning to stay in the swamp. The other comrade answered that it had been about 10 minutes already, and his head hurt and felt sick. Rude thought that it should be about time and became serious since he wanted to weaken them a bit more. But if he took any longer than he stayed, it would become an even bigger burden on her since she'd been injured. He was talking about the severely injured elf woman. As soon as he realized their situation, he walked near the hunters, asked them how the swamp was, and continued that being affected by poison and miasma wasn't rough. As he walked, the other comrade asked him if he finally gave up, while the other stated that Rude caused them a lot of trouble. The protagonist looked at them and stated that it was unfortunate because he was unaffected by any status abnormalities, so he didn't know how much pain they were all feeling. The hunter's leader was shocked when he realized that Rude had abnormal status notification skills, which made him anxious. He thought that Rude tricked them. Eventually, he shouted and ordered his two comrades to kill Rude at that moment. As he pointed at the protagonist, Rude was standing there in the swamp before they attacked him. He already went to one comrade who attacked him, and Rude was confident the one who attacked him, Eyes, couldn't explain. And the latter explained that the poison in the swamp gradually drains their stamina, and the accumulated miasma inside their body lowers their stats. Rude saw that the other comrade would attack him behind him, and before the sword could land on his body, the protagonist already used his skill, which is the steel body, which made the enemy frown. As he captured the two comrades, he opened his skills that elevated electricity, the lightning cloak that released a strong, big yellow current within the two. Both of them were electrocuted as they felt that current and almost burned them. They both groan in pain and point to Rude while madly cursing him. The protagonist again opened his skill, and his hand released a greenish air color. It was the skill he had recently obtained, known as Aerial Slash, and he pointed his hands to the superior of the hunter about to run in his direction. The superior's body was all blood since the letter created a huge slash onto his body, and he still aims to think about the powers that the protagonist released, which are the Venom Still Body, Lightning Cloak, and even the Aerial Slash. He questioned the protagonist as to why a human has monster skills in the world. His worry became evident on his face while a rude person was already running in his direction, and he answered that he had no obligation to tell him. He thought that even though he should be completely superior when it comes to fighting against humans, he was going to lose because of the miasma. Then, his whole body grew a yellowish aura, which led him to open the agility enhancement, and he thought that Rude was just a guy like the protagonist, and ran towards Rude together with his sword. When the protagonist is alarmed by the stronger aura coming from his opponent, he releases his physical boost, which makes him attack, destroy the hunter's sword, and pierce his body. The hunter was shocked and felt the pain. His body was cut in half, and his blood was scattered where he kneeled. Rude's sword had blood on it, and he stated that if it were not for the abnormal status, he would be way stronger than the protagonist. As Rude defeated the hunters, he stood up, as did the elf woman. She thanked him for saving her. She didn't know what would have happened if not for her. They both walked into the labyrinth. Rude replied that he couldn't leave her in that situation. He then looked at the woman and thought she was trying to be brave, but her body was still affected by the miasma, and he did what he could for first aid. He thought that all things aside, it was rare to see an elf in such a remote area. Rude wondered about what kind of curriculum stances she had to be chased by the adventure hunters. They were both disturbed by the huge insects that had shining reflections. They were looking at the insects. As he scanned the insects, he thought that it must have been the leader of those moths, and then he knew that it was Mosfas Great, who had a level of 37. It belonged to the insect species with good status and skills. He thought that he couldn't go down by just being big. Right after, he jumped towards the huge moth. However, Rude, I didn't expect when the huge moth released its own aerial slash, and the moth continuously slashed the protagonist. Luckily, the protagonist dodged the attacks. Hence, the elf human was almost hit by the slashes since it was deflected to the ground. Some rocks almost hit the woman. Rude checked the elf and asked if the woman was all right. She talked back and said that she was okay. He then positioned himself, sat down, and cursed the moth because it scared the protagonist, and he would scare the moth back. The latter asked the moth that flying away put the moth out of reach. Rude and the moth were at their momentum, and the protagonist opened his aerial skills to level the skills of the huge moth, and released several slashes toward the moth. It seemed mad, and it resulted in releasing innumerable tiny attacks and was known as the paralyzing skills. Those attacks do not scare the protagonist because paralysis doesn't work for him, and he cheers. As he realized and cursed, he worriedly looked back at the elf woman. She saw the woman was prepared on her stands while she gripped her wand, and she seemed like she was casting a spell on the wand that released a huge green power towards the direction of the huge moth. The elf woman's attack defeated the huge mark, and it made the protagonist as he thought about wind magic. However, he expected it because she was an elf. After he regained himself from what he witnessed, he pierced the head of the huge moth using his sword. Both of them looked at the defeated moth when the elf woman asked the latter that poison and paralysis don't work on Rude either, and his skills were almost like a monster. When the protagonist heard all those things, he just looked away and held his sword at his back. Then he talked back about how he should explain his situation, and he most likely contemplated whether he would explain it. Before he could mumble, the woman felt something and suddenly fell to the ground. He was worried about the woman and asked her if the paralyzing scales had hit her. The woman shrugged it off and said that it was different. The protagonist agreed that they should get outside the labyrinth. He then said he would explain and tell him his story to the elf. After they went outside, the place was full of trees with a calm vibe. Both were leaning on the big tree to rest, and the elf woman said it felt much better. Since she was out of the labyrinth, she was more stable than she was and was breathing fresh air while the protagonist was looking at her. The woman said that before she explained the situation, she had introduced himself. Her name was Alicia. He was a former adventurer. Upon the elf's name, he was shocked when he asked if she was the Alicia of the Emerald Storm by any chance, and he went ballistic. Alicia was laughing at his reaction and said that he knew the elf. The Azure Trails are the kingdom of Ludias, renowned by the S-rank party, and everyone knows its members. But if he could recall correctly, the thrill was. He stopped, and the woman got it already and answered this and started to reminisce about the thing that happened 5 years ago. The Azure Trails were defeated by the monsters on that day. They challenged the monster awaiting them at the deepest part of the S-rank labyrinth, which is the Abyssal Labyrinth. On that bottle, their leader died. One had to retire due to severe injuries, and the labyrinth swallowed another. And she pointed out that even she didn't come out unscratched either. Alicia showed the marks on her chest, and it was a mark from her previous battle 5 years ago. Rude was flabbergasted and stopped the woman, and then he asked her what she was doing. The protagonist blushed when he saw the cleavage part of the elf. However, Alicia just blew it off and continued to say that the mark was a cursed place on her then. It was the curse of level down. Rude looked on the opposite side and asked about the curse of leveling down because he had never heard of it. Alicia covered her chest and said she hadn't heard of it either. She tried every possible method to break the curse, look at the grass, and continue, but she could only slow its progression. Alicia remembered the group she faced earlier, and stated that those adventure hunters knew about her curse and were planning to profit from it. She will die either way if her level reaches 0. She holds her cape and continues stating that being at such a guy's mercy, she couldn't bear that. Rude was listening to her and couldn't even utter a word, when suddenly something popped into his mind, and he stated that the curse he might be able to help Alicia with it. Afterward, he held his skill card, the substitute skill, since it allowed it to select a target and take on their attacks and status ailments. He then stated that he wanted to try something new and asked Alicia if he could take on the skill he was about to activate. She just looked at him, and after a few seconds, she answered that it was all right. He opened skills and put his hand on the shoulder of the woman when he started to elicit his power, and mumbled, "Substitute." The woman was looking at her anxiously when his power started to be immense and embracing the curse from the woman. Alicia thought and couldn't believe that he was transferring it to himself. When the elf realized what he was doing, she pleaded with the latter to stop because, at the rate, the course would affect him. However, the protagonist smiled and assured the woman that it was okay and that she should trust him. The curse from the woman was huge and covered with a dark purple aura, while the latter seemed satisfied with it. Alicia was surprised when she witnessed her curse slowly moving to the latter while the protagonist was still immense to the curse. The status notified him that his unique skill was activated, and the wall status was nullified. When it was successfully activated, the dark purple curse was slowly covered by the yellowish skill of Rude until it became wrecked and destroyed into pieces. The protagonist stated that it was alright since it seemed to work fine while looking at his palm when he performed his skills. Alicia was dazed by what she had just seen, her lips forming into an O shape due to the happenings, and she asked what had happened at that moment. Rude stated that Alicia should check her guild card. Alicia then looked at her guild card and saw that her rank, species, and status were normal. She couldn't believe it and stated that the curse had been lifted. Rude answered that his unique skill was an abnormal status notification. He looked proud of himself and continued that he thought it might nullify Alicia's curse if he took it on, and he was glad that it worked properly. However, Alicia asked the latter if he was an idiot for doing such things because he took such immense risk, doing the risk for someone he had just met. The latter looked when she heard Alicia. The elf said, "But," and smiled when she thanked the protagonist. Rude, smilingly, looked at Alicia, and he laid his hand on the woman's shoulder and uttered, "Yeah," to Alicia. When the sunset was already seen outside the restaurant, a mug of beer was held by Alicia when she put it to the table after she chugged the drink. She made a sound that seemed she was satisfied. Alicia stated that the food was cheap and the alcohol was delicious, and she applauded the protagonist because he knows a good place. Rude was before her, and he approved what Alicia was doing. On the other table, someone was looking at them. Rude then stated that they got kicked out last time. The woman happily cheered, and Rude continued that even though they got kicked out last time, she asked the woman if she was okay to drink that much because she was badly injured. Alicia faced him with a blush on their cheeks because she was tipsy and enthusiastically answered that she had returned and recovered. On auspicious days such as that moment, how could Rude not drink? She then turned to ask Rude, and they both gave a toast to one another. When the protagonist chugged his beer, he asked the woman what she planned to do from now on. He received an immediate answer from the woman that she gets that she would like to know more about him first. Rude was flustered and looked at her, and then Alicia questioned why he decided to become an adventurer. She put her hand on her chin and smiled at the latter while she waited for Rude to answer. He was reminded of his time, which was a long time ago. The monsters attacked the village where Rude lived, and he lost them all because of those monsters, his family, and his friends. Yet, he thanks an S-rank adventurer who rushed over to the scene, where the S-rank faced the snake monsters. As he watched the adventurer, he smiled at the latter, and right after, he swung his sword and released a red skin to defeat the monster. Because of that, Rude was able to survive. The adventurer went near him and was just comforting the younger Rude. The protagonist stated that he will never forget the sight of that adventurer at that moment. As he looked to the adventurer who served him, he wanted to become a ranked adventurer like him someday so he could save many people as well. After he reminisced, he uttered that it was his goal. Alicia, who listened to Rude, created a sound while holding her mug and proceeded to say that it was a nice goal. The protagonist asks her if she won't laugh at him, and Alicia is happy because she also dreams of reaching an S rank herself. Besides, she intends to gain more power than before she was cursed, and then winked at the latter. She was certain her companions were still trapped in the deepest part of the abyssal labyrinth. Rude was looking at her, and the woman continued that whatever the outcome, maybe she intended to challenge that monster again. But at that moment, at least until they had both gained enough strength to achieve their own goals, she then asked what the latter said about forming a party together. Alicia raised his hands to the latter while smiling. However, she received an answer with no and he. Rude stopped when someone grabbed the wrist of Alicia. The disruptor said that Rude had quite the dining dinner girl he was drinking with while holding Alicia's wrist. He uttered the miasma scavenger as they gazed at the protagonist. Rude thought those guys were the ones from the time, as he recalled the humiliation he received from those guys. Then, they persuaded Alicia not to go drinking with a bore like the protagonist and invited her to come with them. As he invited Alicia, the yellow-haired guy felt someone was grabbing his shoulder, and Rude ordered him to let go of Alicia. The man wasn't happy about grabbing his shoulder and turned to the protagonist as he eyed the latter. Then he grabbed Rude's collar, and the guy called him a shit. When things were about to get messy, eye for eye, Alicia stopped them and said that both of them should stop. They were focused, and they both faced the woman. The crowd cheered when they announced the winner was Alicia. After the announcements, she faced the protagonist and smiled with a peace sign in her hand. Rude also smiled and showed his thumbs up to the woman. As they exchanged drinks, the room was still chaotic due to people drinking inside while Rude and Alicia were watching as they leaned on the wall. The protagonist said that Alicia did great, considering the fact that she'd already counted quite a lot before the drinking contest. The woman just giggled in her response to the latter. She then stated that Rude was her benefactor after all and pinpointed him, so she hadn't fallen so long that she should sit still. She drunkenly stated that when her benefactor was being ridiculed, she was lost in thought, and without a second, she fell due to her drunkenness. Rude then catches her and smiles while he holds Alicia's torso. The protagonist suddenly uses his skill and uses a substitute. The woman was surprised and eyed him. The latter explained that he transferred the woman's drunkenness to himself because he couldn't get drunk after all. By that, Alicia stated that the curse was first, and at that moment, it was her drunkenness. She was enthusiastic and held the protagonist's hand. The woman was amazed by the wonderful skills of the latter, and they should definitely form a party together. After she invited the latter to form a party, she went back to the people who were drinking and wanted to drink some more. Rude told Alicia to drink in moderation. The menu appeared to be a special salted grilled barnamas. The elf woman saw the grilled barnamas, all stating that it was too bad that she couldn't try their special dish. Then, the older man appeared and explained that a monster had taken up residence in the barnamas fishing grounds. He crossed his arms, leaned to the wood, and continued that he already sent in a request to the guild, but it looked like all the top adventurers were currently out. He then called Rude and Alicia, asked them if it was all right with them, and invited them to take on the request. At Barnana's fishing grounds, the sea and weather have perfect vibes. The boat was seen, too. Alicia was proud of the Barnama's fishing grounds. Rude and Alicia rowed the boat as they arrived at the grounds. The woman shouted that they would defeat the monster and eat some special dishes as soon as possible, and the latter said, yeah. They were cheerful when Rude looked at his side and was surprised when he saw the monster. He smiled and pointed out that the monster was there. It was the monster the owner was talking about. Both fixed their gaze on it. Alicia called his name when they both worried about what they saw. The anxiousness was evident on their faces when the numerous monsters encircled their boat. The sea monster was under them and could easily take their boat down. Rude used his skills so that he could foresee the status and level of his enemy when he already saw it. The monsters were known as Journabes, their levels fell to 23, and their status was quite low. However, skills were possessed something that I didn't have, which are high-speed swimming, water bullets, and sniping. After learning something from their enemies, the Journabe started to attack. He dodged it with his sword, and the Journabe seemed like a rhythm to their attack. He then realized that Journabe's attack was spitting one after the other, and the protagonist couldn't avoid them all if he were only using the foothold. The boat was shaken, so the latter decided to jump into the sea. Alicia was shocked when the latter jumped out to face the innumerable genres. As Rude successfully dives into the sea, he was immediately surrounded by the Journabes, and he wasn't scared of them. He labeled the Journabes as small fry while he was smiling. The uncountable genres attacked and swam quickly on his position simultaneously. He used a skill that made his hand release a yellow current. Then, right after, he aimed his lightning cloak at some of the Journabes. His skill shone everywhere, and almost half of the monsters had already been defeated. The electrocuted Journabes were floating above the sea. Rude then also went above the sea and was gasping for some oxygen. Alicia noticed Rude and called the protagonist, while the latter assured the woman that it was all right, but there were still a few left. He thinks that the Journabes were deep under the water, and he was wondering if there was a reason that they didn't attack, if they were just being cautious, or if they could be trying to protect something. Rude informed Alicia that he was going to dive in deeper and check out what was going on. And also, if possible, there was something he would like the woman to do. Alicia was listening intently to the latter. As Rude already dived deeper, a rope circled his waist. He saw numerous Journabes and seemed like they were letting Rude pass by. Rude then stated that he already knew it because they were not attacking him or running away either, and he speculated that they had to be trying to protect something. He became alert when he spotted something, a huge monster with tentacles on it. The protagonist used his skill appraisal, and he immediately saw that it was the tentacles that were in level 38. The status of the tentacles was quite high, and the skills that were somewhat known to him were paralysis poison, autotomy, poison resistance, and accelerated healing. He carefully examined the tentacles and realized it was a huge sea anemone. He was contemplating if it was a hermit crab. It seems that the tentacles have shells in them like protected gear. Those tentacles produce numerous shells that turn into Journabe. When he saw the transforming Journabes, Rude uttered that the tentacles were the ones who were making the Journabes. The shock was drawn into his face. He then realized that if he didn't defeat the Journabes, there would be no point in continuously killing it. Rude decided to swarm above the sea and continued that he should prepare first since it wasn't showing any sign of attacking. However, before he could move an inch, the tentacles were already on his feet and suddenly dragged him into the deepest part. The tentacle was encircled on his foot, which made the guards attack him. He cursed and realized that the girl wasn't attacking him because they were trying to take the attention of the feelers. Rude then said that if they want to play it that way, he uses his lightning cloak and uses it over the place. The tentacles also felt the current, and Rude asked how it was and continued that as they touched it directly, even the huge body should. He stopped when he saw that tentacles were already detached from its body. He remembered the autotomy skills the tentacles needed. He realized that, since it immediately cut off its failures as soon as the lightning struck it, it managed to avoid a fatal injury. The tentacles were already aiming in his direction, and he faced an inconvenience when he was running out of breath. Even though the protagonist was in a difficult situation, held the rope and pulled it. It seems like he was signaling Alicia. When the woman noticed it, she thought Rude left it to her. The woman held her wand and cast wind to operate their boat and move quickly. As soon as the rope straightened, Rude held it, and he quickly followed the flow of their boat. When they succeeded in their escape plan, they stopped on the shore where Rude was lying on the sand as he rhythm took his breath. Alicia went to his side and asked if he was okay. The protagonist scratched his back and groaned while she thanked the woman for saving him. He then told Alicia what he found out, which was a boss deep underwater continuously producing Journabes, and that also has accelerated healing skill, so he needed to hurry back. When Alicia quickly analyzed their situation, she stated that the monster had a huge advantage over them in water. Also, her magic wouldn't reach down there either, and she asked the protagonist if he had a plan in mind. Rude stated that there was one way. He thinks he needs to make up his mind, and he bows down when he remembers Alicia telling him about her curse and even having a party with him. That's why he had to tell her his secret before she replied. Rude turned his back to the elf woman and pleaded with Alicia not to tell anyone. The woman who was sitting back and was invested while she just listened to the protagonist. Rude stated what he was about to show to the woman who was frozen at the moment. Something disrupted the peace in the deepest part of the sea, where the tentacle was, and using his skill in high-speed swimming wasn't nice. The genes were prepared to devour the protagonist. However, they were immediately defeated by Rude. Since his gaze was focused on the huge monster, the tentacles were already extending their feelers directly to the protagonist. Rude's speed was unpredictable, as he was already near the huge monster. He cut it in half, smiled, and mumbled, "See ya." Right after, he used his lightning cloak to electrocute all the places. When he defeated the huge monster, he stated that the fishing spot should return to its peaceful state. And Rude remembered that he had a problem with Alicia. He remembered that after seeing him devour a monster, he wondered how the woman and what she would say when they got back, since the woman was to stand to utter a word. As he was already above the sea, he stopped when Alicia wasn't there where he left the woman. He then just elicited himself to smile and thought, why did he assume that the woman would wait for him? As he walked out of the sea, he also thought that he got his hopes up once again. Upon being drawn into his thoughts, someone said that the protagonist was late and astonished when he saw Alicia holding the branches of a tree. She stated that it didn't look like he was hurt and asked if he had already taken down the boss. Rude was contemplating to answer but proceeded to say yes. When Alicia heard it, she then sat and slowly put down the branches that she picked up and thanked God and explained that she couldn't just sit still while waiting. So he started gathering some branches for the campfire since it was good for drying clothes. The protagonist was looking at her and asked Alicia if she was okay with it, and explained that after seeing him doing that, the woman answered that it did surprise her quite a bit while he picked up the branches and continued that, however Rude, he trusted her enough to reveal his secret, then smiled and continued that it made her happier than anything else. The protagonist is surprised and dumbfounded when the woman is happy about it, and he thanks the woman. As Rude remembered, he wanted to get the boss's skills as well. He cut them apart to bring them back. While he was tagging the rope over, he tangled the huge monster. The net seems heavy because of the tentacles and Barnabas. He thought it might be strange if he only ate it, but the woman was surprised and asked if it could be. She stopped, and the latter said it was Barnabas. He brought it back and stated that it might be weird to sit next to a monster. However, before he finished his words, Alicia interrupted him and enthusiastically said that she would eat it. Rude laughed when he saw the woman's face. When the sky turned into dawn, the protagonist said that while they were eating, he would tell the woman about the first time he ate a monster. The night approached faster, and they were already cooking the meat. Alicia was satisfied with her food because of its tastiness while holding her fork. She still couldn't believe it and was still surprised that the protagonist eats monsters, then proceeded to say that there was such a reason for it. Rude replied that he was grateful for that because he was destined for an E rank quickly, and he got a step closer to his dream. He smiled after he explained it. Alicia was listening intently and said that the protagonist uses that power to save her from the adventurer hunter and the curse, and she seems grateful for the latter. She continued about when the meat was cooked like that, and she tasted it quite delicious. Their food was journeyed fibers and miso braised tentacles. Rude agreed with Alicia and said that it surprisingly tasted pretty good, and he offered his journey because he doesn't need to eat it anymore but just wanted to try cooking it properly. He offered it to the woman if she wanted to try the meat. The woman explained that there was no guarantee that she would survive with the same symptoms, so she respectfully passed. The protagonist didn't force the woman to try it, and the woman proceeded to ask Rude once again to join her party. The latter didn't utter a word in a second and proceeded to utter her name and said that if it was her. He stopped and asked if the woman didn't have stronger acquaintances. Alicia bowed down and explained that even if they didn't die in the labyrinth, considering the human lifespan, many might have retired, and also stated that most adventurers on the front lights have quite a few screws loose. She couldn't trust them to watch her back, no matter how strong they were. She smiled at the protagonist and continued that for adventuring together, she wanted someone that she could trust with her back with ease in mind. Alicia displayed her hand for Rude to hold on and said that if it was the latter, she thought that he could do it. The protagonist closes his eyes and smiles as he joins the woman's party. Morning came at the Adventurers Guild where in the Barona branch. Alicia was excited to get ready for their first job as a party. Many adventurers were looking at them, and Rude then said that even though one of them was being E-rank, he doubted that they would get any big requests. Alicia agreed because the protagonist was probably right for the first time. They walked inside the guild. As they were already at the front desk, the woman then notified the woman and lazily looked at them. Alicia happily stated they were forming a party that day and wanted them to be registered. The woman at the front desk was shocked when she saw the card of the woman and stated Alicia's rank while holding it tightly. She was stuttering as she read the woman's name and proceeded to Rude's card, which said he was known as a miasma scavenger. The front desk woman was incompletely shocked and wondered why she would join the party with the miasma scavenger. However, Alicia positioned her face near the woman, immediately eliciting that it was nothing, and she understood. Alicia also wanted to rank up Rude, and the latter looked away. She also asked about what requirements Rude had missing. The woman quickly scanned the paper, stuttered, rhythmized it right after, and stated that the protagonist had gathered enough achievements, so it was only his battle record that was lacking. Alicia pleaded with the woman to tell them the most difficult subjugation request they could take on together. They said yes. At that moment, that would be in the area near Barona, where the sun shines bright steadily. The extermination of the back of gray wolves at a level of 11 was low, and the only skill was scent detection. Rude smiled while using his stealth skill and was behind the wolf. Right after the wolf felt his presence, they turned back, and it was the movement that the protagonist waited for him to cut and slice the wolves while he screamed, "Take this." The wolves were running in their direction, and Rude said he would have left the reinforcement to Alicia. The woman was prepared and stated that here she went and cast his skill Thaw, which was the wind that covered his body with a greenish air. She then released the Sylphide. A small figure appears, surrounded by a bright, swirling green glow. Alicia's smile confidently showed that she was ready, and her staff glowed with green energy. Alicia called out to it to lend her its power. Rude is looking at Alicia, eyes wide, realizing what he's witnessing. It was Alicia's unique skill, and it was a spirit magic, he thought to himself, recognizing the rare and powerful ability that she possessed. The air shimmers with an intense green light, swirling and gathering power around Alicia's unique skill. Alicia, who is surrounded by a vibrant aura. In her hand, she holds a staff glowing with energy, and her expression is calm but focused. There were two wolves who charged in front of her. Great wind slices through, she murmurs. The air trembles as Alicia releases her spirit magic, sending a swarm of green energy crashing towards her enemies. The spell's force is immense, cutting through the air like a blade, and everything in its path is obliterated. A group of monstrous creatures tries to withstand the onslaught, but they are no match for the devastating magic. They are blasted away, their bodies shattered by the energy, leaving behind only the aftermath of destruction. The sheer power of the attack tears apart the ground itself. From a distance, Rude watches the scene unfold, his expression of quiet amazement. He looks down at the scorched earth, where the blast has left a massive, smoldering trench. He thinks how tremendous its power is, and there's no way one could dodge those, realizing just how powerful Alicia's magic truly is. Alicia sighs in relief, looks at Rude, and says that her power before getting cursed won't come out after all, she guesses. Rude thumbs up at her and looks nervously at Alicia, thinking he can't imagine what it would have been like at full strength. Rude felt something, looked back, and saw that wolves were swarming towards him. Rude can't believe many of them are hiding, and he can't block them in time as the wolf is already in front of him, attacking him. Sylphide, Alicia mutters, and a green light appears. The wolves are shocked when Rude and Alicia disappear. They are looking for where the two go. The wolves look up when they hear Rude's voice, who is flying together with Alicia. Rude tells Alicia how amazing it is that she can do something like that, too. Rude thanks Alicia for saving him. Alicia smiles while holding her staff and says that if he is thankful, he should thank the little one instead. The little one is just making a sound. Alicia and Rude looked down, and still, it looked like they couldn't let their guard down. She just saw about 5 more watching them from the bushes, and probably many more of them were hiding, Alicia said. Then he guessed it was his turn, Rude said while looking at the wolves below them. He activates one of his skills, echolocation, and a series of golden rings pulse out from his body, scanning the surrounding area. The rings ripple through the air, revealing hidden threats in the dark forest ahead. Suddenly, glowing red eyes begin to appear from the shadow wolves, fierce and menacing, baring their fangs as they emerge from the darkness. Rude assesses the situation calmly. There are about 30 of them, he thinks, counting the creatures. Combined with the ones they already took down, they will achieve their goal at once. Turning to Alicia, he gives a command to attack where he tells her to, as she unleashed her magic, sending a massive wave of green energy crashing forward. She lifted her staff high, drawing on the energy around her. The air around them began to hum with power as she called upon the spirit once again. Her aura started to glow brighter, the green light swirling around her like a storm. The blast was powerful, a roaring wave of spirit energy that swept across the ground, obliterating everything in its path. The wolves didn't stand a chance. They were caught in the surge of magic and flung backward, their forms disintegrating into nothingness as the energy consumed them. Echolocation loses precision in open spaces, and even Alicia can't accurately target too many spots at once. Still, they can herd the gray wolves into one place if they attack from the sides. While Rude is hiding in a tree and waiting to attack, Alicia, who is done attacking, says she's done on her part, and the rest is up to him. Rude, who is just hiding behind the bushes. Paralyzing breath, he said, and he exhaled. A cloud of golden dust began to flow from his mouth, spreading out in a wide arc towards the wolves, and they were completely paralyzed. The magic held them in place, rendering them helpless. Without wasting a second, Rude reached for his sword, the blade gleaming as he drew it from its sheath. He looked at the wolves, their bodies frozen in place by his magic, and knew what he had to do. In the dimming light of the late afternoon, Rude and Alicia gathered a pack of wolves. There are 52 in total, and she can't believe they encountered so many in one day. Maybe their numbers have just increased that much, Rude speculated, the weariness evident in his voice. Earlier that day, he had witnessed something extraordinary. Alicia had used a kind of magic familiar to him. Was that spirit magic you used earlier? Rude asked. Alicia nodded, yes. She explained she could use magic by borrowing power from the spirits that exist in nature. She pointed ahead to the figure hovering, a spirit named Sylphide. Spirits are generally everywhere, even though they don't show themselves. But to use their power, we need to offer magic as compensation. Rude listened intently as she continued. Even so, she can cast powerful magic with little magic energy. As he saw earlier, Sylphide helped her cause phenomena like floating in the air. Rude looks at Sylphide when it goes to his head. Indeed, Rude admitted that he had never heard of wind magic that strong before. Then Sylphide reached out and gave a playful tug on his hair, her smile growing as if she found great joy in it. Rude flinched, his hand moving to his head. Oh, stop it, he cried out, his voice a mix of surprise and mild pain. By the way, Sylphide loves to play pranks. The more you react, the more she enjoys it, Alicia said with a chuckle. Alicia said the sky would be dark, so she wanted to get back quickly so they could fly back part of the way to be. Then she cast a spell to make Rude fly also. Rude said this is the best as they take to the air again. Rude asked Alicia what other types of spirit magic she could use. Alicia looked at him and answered that she specialized in water, ice, light, and earth. But spirits of darkness and fire aren't a good match for her. If the spirit is incompatible, it demands enormous magic power, it might not lend you its power. Sylphide faced Rude, and Alicia said that Sylphide liked him too. Sylphide, Rude noted, a smile forming on his lips. The Sylphide then pinched his ear. Rude pointed at the Sylphide, still pinching his ear, and asked, even with what Sylphide was doing to him. Alicia, who had been watching with a smile, said, yes. Their conversation was cut short as Rude suddenly pointed toward the horizon. He observed that smoke was rising there, and his tone was now serious. There should be a village in that direction. Without another word, they headed toward the plume of smoke that marred the evening sky. Flames engulfed the background, casting an intense orange-red glow across the sky, signaling the devastation that has taken place. Emerging from the flames is a menacing creature. Its glowing yellow eyes and hulking, muscular forms suggest a powerful and dangerous foe. The creature's presence, combined with the fire and destruction surrounding it, creates a sense of urgency and impending danger for anyone nearby. The village was chaotic, flames roaring and spreading through the wooden buildings. The sky was darkened by smoke, and the air was thick with heat and panic. Villagers ran in every direction, their cries for help almost drowned out by the crackling of the fire. Amidst the fire, two figures stood out. One of them was wearing protective gear and a sword. They were soldiers, staring in disbelief at the scene unfolding before them. He cursed under his breath. Weren't gray wolves the only monsters in this area? One of them exclaimed, gripping his sword tightly. His companion, eyes wide with fear, nodded. He wondered, frustrated and confused, why that thing was here. They weren't talking about the fire. Emerging from the flames was a massive, terrifying creature, its body muscular and covered in dark fur, with glowing yellow eyes that seemed to pierce through the smoke. It had large, twisted horns and a mane that blazed red, like the fire surrounding it. A Baphomet. Recognizing the creature, they never expected to face one. The Baphomet stood tall and menacing, and it was clearly no ordinary monster. Without warning, the Baphomet raised its hand, and a glowing red magic circle appeared before them. The soldiers were worried, and they knew that they were in deep trouble. A blazing red spear emerged in the red magic circle, glowing with intense heat. With a menacing look, the Baphomet pointed the spear at the two soldiers and released it. The spear shot forward with incredible speed, a blur of fiery light. As the spear neared the two soldiers, a sudden blue light blocked its path. The soldier, peeking over his shield to see what had happened, saw Rude standing between them. With a determined expression, Rude stood with his point finger that the protagonist had used his magic spirit skill, Water Bullet, as he intended to intercept the attack. The Baphomet froze when he saw what happened when it launched his attack. Alicia appeared behind the two soldiers and asked them if they were right. The soldiers looked at her and answered that they were fine and thanked her. Then the woman stated that, assuring the two that they would care well for the monster. Alicia asked them to give her a sitrep, which is short for a situation report. While Rude charged toward the Baphomet, the protagonist held his sword and activated his appraisal skill to gather more information about their opponent. The Baphomet glared at Rude, its eyes burning with anger and surprise. The Baphomet was level 27, with stats of HP 122, Strength 88, Endurance 95, Magic 132, Spirit 124, and Agility 78. Its skills included Principles of Fire Magic, Echolocation, Increased Mana Recovery, Principles of Earth Magic, and Mental Strengthening. Using his appraisal, Rude thought that even though its level is lower than a general, its stats are worlds apart. He guessed that means it's different compared to regular monsters. But its skills, Principles of Magic. With a fierce glare, the Baphomet created 5 red magic circles in the air. Each circle glowed and crackled with fiery energy, aiming straight at Rude. As the spear moved toward him, Rude quickly dodged and weaved to avoid their attacks. He moved swiftly, narrowly escaping the explosive bursts of flames. Rude thought back to his fire magic. He admitted to himself that the fire magic that he had until now was too weak and not something he could rely on in battle. But a thought crossed his mind. If he could somehow defeat this creature, perhaps he could harness its power. However, he doesn't expect the Baphomet to block Rude's attack, and the protagonist thinks about how the monster managed to block it. Rude, he felt his sharpness and wondered if it was due to the Steel Claw's skill, realizing that brute force might be his only option. Suddenly, a 4 magic circle appears and attacks Rude, and he gets worried about the sudden attack of the monster. Right after, an explosion happens. Alicia looks back and sees Rude struggle as he barely avoids appearing in the smoke. Alicia called his name and asked if he was okay, and he replied. Rude noticed the creature had fired off 2 flaming spheres, keeping them in reserve for defense. The Baphomet was one tough opponent. Rude acknowledged that it looked like he was on guard. And then, he told Alicia that they would exchange info while they could. The two of them were gazing at the monster intently, and Alicia then said that the villagers hadn't been fully evacuated. She had already asked the people from earlier to help guide the evacuees, but she still wanted to avoid collateral damage. And it was not like she could use powerful magic to defeat him in one go. Rude thinks desperately since Alicia's magic power must have depleted from the fight and her running about earlier, so they can't rely on Alicia's powerful spirit magic, and he should have to do something. Alicia spoke up and told him she would handle the magic. Rude ran while holding his sword and trusted the woman on this. He then thinks that no matter what happens, he keeps on going. When the protagonist was running, the blue skill power of Alicia was elevated and followed Rude, who was facing the open attack of the monster. As the battle raged on, Rude observed how their magic collided, canceling each other due to their opposing attributes. The Baphomet's eyes widened, got mad, and used earth magic to gather numerous and inconsistent size of rocks and point them to Rude. He was running toward the monster's direction while Alicia backed him up. Go, Alicia urged, maintaining her focus. This time, it accurately fires rocks of the same mass with incredible precision. She's conserving magic power while avoiding collateral damage. What precise magic control, as expected from a former S rank. Rude jumped while physical boost. Rude shouted, enhancing his strength and charging at the Baphomet. His sword slashed the Baphomet's fingers, its force sending the creature reeling. The monster growled in pain. As the protagonist keeps swaying his sword, the Baphomet was about to scratch the ladder when a sudden fire was splashed on the monster direction. The monster was growling as it received the fire that may have burned him. Alicia made it as she cast a spell on the Baphomet and said how it liked that taste of his own medicine. The Baphomet was engulfed in flames, roaring in pain and fury. Its dark fur caught fire, the flames licking and curling around its muscular body, creating a horrifying yet mesmerizing sight. The villagers looked at their village with a mix of horror and helplessness. Their faces were tense and filled with fear as they watched the flames surround their homes. They stood silently, staring at the fire, unable to believe what was happening. The scene was utter despair, with their village being consumed by the flames. As the adventurer surveyed the devastation, he wondered if the earlier explosion and the horrifying scream meant that the adventurers had managed to defeat the Baphomet. The wounded adventurer apologized, saying that if he hadn't been injured, he could have stayed behind to help. Both adventurers were shocked when Alicia appeared. She approached them and thanked them for assisting with the evacuation. The adventurer with the shield on his back approached Alicia and expressed relief, saying it was good to see her safe and smiling. Alicia confirmed she was indeed safe and explained that while she had landed a fatal blow on the Baphomet, there was a chance it might survive and attack again. Therefore, they would be chasing after it. Her serious tone made the villagers look at her with renewed fear. Alicia then mentioned she had a small favor to ask. The adventurers responded cheerfully, saying they would do anything they could. Alicia smiled awkwardly and asked if they could spare some food, as she was a bit hungry. In the forest on the outskirts of the village, Rude stood over the body of the Baphomet and a fire. Alicia appeared, announcing her return. Rude welcomed her back and asked how the villagers were. Thanks to the adventurers, Alicia walked over and sat beside him, saying that everyone had been successfully evacuated. She added that the adventurers decided to chase after the Baphomet, so the disappearance of the corpse shouldn't seem suspicious. Rude apologized for the situation and thanked her. Rude then turned his attention to his cooking. "This is looking pretty good," he said, examining his Baphomet soup. Alicia looked on with excitement as Rude added some mugwort and ginger. After tasting it, he smiled and commented that while there was still a distinctive goat smell, it would be delicious if they could ignore it. A notification window appeared, stating that Rude had acquired the following skills: Principles of Fire Magic, Principles of Earth Magic, Mental Strengthening, Steel Claws, and Increased Mana Recovery Speed. Alicia remarked that the soup looked really delicious but admitted that watching someone eat a humanoid monster was a bit unsettling, reminding her of their battle. She expressed some reservations about it. Rude agreed, acknowledging that it was also somewhat unsettling how accustomed he was becoming to this. Alicia felt a sudden shift in the air and glanced beside her. Her eyes widened as she spotted 3 Stampigs emerging from the forest underbrush. A window appeared that said Stamping Level 22, Status HP 51, Strength 44, Endurance 47, Magic 14, Spirit 28, Agility 39, and its skill is a Flash Step. Stamping, when Alicia recognizes it and she gets up, holding her staff. Rude wondered that there were too many monsters, and he also got up and said it had come to this. It's time for his magic combat debut. He shouted excitedly. He extended his arms, and nothing happened. Rude got confused that nothing happened, and Alicia looked at him. The Stampig starts to attack them, and Rude, who is shocked by the sudden movement. A window that says Skill Flash Step speed increases rapidly when moving in a straight line over a certain distance. The Stampig who charged at them suddenly got knocked over the food that Rude was making. Alicia looks at Rude and asks if she thinks he is able to use magic now, and she says that she is running pretty low on magic power, so she can't offer much support. Rude, who is looking down, murmurs that he won't forgive them and that he had to drain the blood and remove all that scum while thinking just how much time they think that took and all that he wanted to enjoy it. So he did his best in trying to change its flavors and that they need to take responsibility and let him eat their meat. Alicia looks disbelieving at the Rude saying. Rude charges to the Stampig but Alicia holds his hood, which Rude got choked on, and she says he needs to calm down. Rude listens and looks at Alicia while massaging his neck. Alicia said that with the skill it used earlier, Flash Step increased their charging power, making even a single blow have considerable strength behind them. Even just as an off chance, we should still fight at a distance where Flash Step couldn't reach. And she looked back and said while running, in other words, they have to retreat for now while the 3 Stamping chasing them. Under the night sky, the Stampigs is looking at them but Alicia and Rude is sitting at the tree while the 3 Stampigs below them. Alicia said it looked like they had managed to lose them, so she whispered to Rude and asked him about his magic, which he hadn't activated earlier. Rude scratched his face and said that he had never been unable to use the skills that he had acquired until now, that is. Alicia suggests how he checks it with his appraisal skills. Rude remembered and told her that she was right. The window appeared and said Skill Principles of Magic, Fire Magic. Those who possess this can instantly understand how to use fire magic and the principles of earth magic. Those who possess the skill will instinctively understand how to use earth magic. Rude, while looking at the window, tells Alicia that it says that he should be able to understand instinctively, though. Then Alicia just said that if he still can't use it, then that could only mean that his brain is so unfortunate that he is unable to comprehend magic while putting her hand on her chin, wondering. Rude then asks if she isn't being a bit too cruel to him. Alicia thought deeply. But still, he is able to use fire magic as weakly as it may be, so that isn't a really good explanation of why it didn't activate at all. Could it be Alicia? Thought. Then she suddenly realized that maybe to use magic and the monster skill, he needed to know how to manipulate mana. Rude realizes what Alicia said is not magic but mana, though he doesn't know much about mana if it's about absorbing monsters' powers. He will give it a try. And then he puts his arm on again like what he did earlier. He closed his eyes and thought to remember it. It was like back then when he ate the Minotaur, that burst of power if I could bring it out of my body. Alicia looked at Rude, and then Rude opened his eyes and saw 3 magic circles. He said to himself that he did it, and as long as he could sense the mana, He could use it like it was a part of my own body. Then he summoned the flaming spear and pointed it out to the stamping below them. The creatures looked up in surprise as the spear hurtled toward them. With a burst of flames and an explosion, the scene was filled with light and chaos. Under the starry night sky, Rude whistled contentedly as he fried the 3 stampigs he had hunted. The sizzling sounds filled the air, mingling with the mouth-watering scent of cooking meat. Rude with a satisfied grin, he declared, "Stampig diced pork cutlets." He glanced over at Alyssa, who was waiting patiently. "He says sorry for making her wait so long," he added. Alicia smiled understandingly. "He doesn't need to apologize," she said. However, she thinks that the face he is making is a bit irritating. Alicia took the opportunity to talk to him about his magic. He needed to focus on mana, not just magic power, to use his magic skills effectively. It didn't seem like his mana was depleted during his previous attack, so he should be able to use it continuously. Rude nodded in agreement and explained how he feels when he feels the mana surging through him, and he instantly understands how to use his skills. If mana can replace magic power, he could use it to strengthen his body or weapons. He smiled and continued holding the tongs. Then, Rude elaborated that many adventurers choose to hone their magic power and use it in close combat. By circulating magic power around the body, their physical abilities are enhanced. Applying it to a weapon can increase attack power and even allow for powerful slashes. Alicia nodded, understanding his point. She then stated that at that moment, the latter hadn't had so little magic power up until that moment, and he hadn't been able to use those skills. Rude got her point and said, "Yeah," while gazing at the food on the plate since it was already done. Then he continued by saying that he seemed to have way more mana than magic power at that moment. Yet, more importantly, it looked like he could replenish his mana just by eating the monster, he enthusiastically explained to the woman. She observed while watching him munch his food. Just then, a notification window appeared, announcing the Flash Step skill had been acquired. Alicia realized that, in other words, he could absorb mana through food and store it inside his body, she thought. However, her attention was soon drawn back to the food, which looked delicious as Rude ate with apparent enjoyment. Rude asked if she felt like eating now, noticing her gaze and drool over her face. Despite her desire for the food, Alicia hesitated jokingly. Just then, an explosion erupted nearby, shaking the ground. A massive stamping appeared, its presence intimidating and formidable. Alicia and Rude sprang into action, readying themselves for another fight. The big boss appeared, Rude said with a determined glint in his eye. The massive stampig charged at Alicia with alarming speed. Alicia, caught off guard by the creature's rapid approach, thought, "How fast it is." Without hesitation, Rude cast the spell Flash Step, shouting, "Flash Step." He appeared before Alicia, intercepting the charge and saving her from harm. Alicia thanked Rude, her voice filled with gratitude. As the stampig prepared for its next attack, Alicia was puzzled. What's going on? Because they encountered so many monsters, she wondered. They were not even in a labyrinth. Why is a monster like that? The King Stampig knocked over the food Rude had been preparing once again. Rude and frustrated, he muttered over and over again that his food kept getting ruined. He pointed at the Stampig and exclaimed to stop messing with him. Then, given its fire-resistant skill, he considered this monster could make for a pretty good roast. Even if the oil on its body catches fire, it probably won't care. A status window appeared, showing King Stampig's details. Rude noted the high stats with a mix of concern and resolve. It has impressive stats, he thought, his frustration mounting. It only has Flash Step and fire resistance, though. He will have to deal with it. Determined to act, Rude decided to use his principles of earth magic. "Prepare to face the wrath of a gourmet," he declared, raising his fist, which was made of earth magic. He punched King Stampig, but the creature effortlessly crashed through him, leaving Rude confused and disoriented. The Stampig struck Rude, and Rude cast a spell, Steel, which sent him crashing into a tree. Alicia, seeing Rude's plight, called out to him. When Rude remained unconscious, King Stampig turned its attention to Alicia. Desperate, she summoned Sylphide, hoping to gain an edge. She unleashed its power. But despite Sylphide's efforts, it was clear that the Stampig's thick fur and muscles made it nearly impervious to both earth magic and spirit winds. The Stampig was preparing for its next attack, and it seemed unstoppable. Alicia thought that it was coming. Suddenly, it trembles. Rude, regaining consciousness, casts his skill Roar. Standing and looking down at the creature, he shouted not to turn its eyes away from him. It is not even over yet. Damn pig. Rude contemplates his situation, realizing he can't use Flash Step or Steel Body at the moment. He thought about making this a battle of attrition while ensuring Alicia's safety. There's a chance it might switch targets to her, he reasoned, but he doesn't have a skill that can take it down in one blow. He will need to give it a try. He pointed his sword upward and focused on drawing mana from his body. As the King Stampig approached, Rude imagined the mana pouring into the sword. Alicia watched in shock as the colored red mana flowed into the weapon. When the Stampig was close enough, Rude opened his eyes and unleashed a powerful slash. The sword cut through the King Stampig, slicing it in half. Alicia was astounded. He exclaimed, unable to believe what he had just witnessed. Rude, equally surprised, looked at the remains of his sword. Alicia said he used mana to strengthen his weapon, but he was still in disbelief, and he just managed it without any practice. Rude shrugged. He thought it felt possible, he admitted, but his mana had been leaking out. And now, his sword is cracked into pieces. Both Alicia and Rude stared at the damaged sword. My sword, Rude shouted in dismay. He used it a lot, so he guessed it couldn't be helped as he looked down at King Stampig's body beside him. Standing beside him, Alicia observes and tells him that it seems like it couldn't withstand the amount of mana he poured into it. A weapon is practically an extension of an adventurer's body. She is sure that he is shocked right now. Rude sighed, feeling a mix of disappointment and relief. Let's end things here for today, he said. As for the King Stampig, he will take its meat. The seventh layer of the Miasma Labyrinth was shrouded in darkness and filled with danger. Adventurers were locked in combat with monstrous foes. Fire magic illuminated the gloom as Magnus, the mage, unleashed a fiery blast, while the great Miasma Rat almost jumped to the guy to his comrades. It was his cue, and he charged forward with his sword, slashing at the monstrous Miasma Rat. Magnus sighed, and those superior species of miasma rats are something else, he remarked, eyeing the defeated monster warily. He looked near the rat since they were quite tough opponents, but it seemed they were no match for our teamwork. I agreed with what Rigurd said. Magnus chuckled because his friend got that right. Their laughter was cut short when Rondo, the sword-wielding adventurer, suddenly looked back, sensing something. It was nothing when Magnus noticed his friend and asked Rondo what was wrong. Rondo replied that he couldn't shake the feeling. He cautiously walked toward the cave and stated that he thought he heard someone from the cave. His friends look at him, and the tank adventurer follows close behind. Why would there be a staircase here? The tank adventurer wondered aloud. Magnus, excited by the discovery, descended the stairs eagerly. Could it be a hidden path? They should have a look, as Magnus said. As they went inside the hidden path, the three adventurers were amazed and cheered at what they found and a treasure chest gleaming in the dim light. Rondo approached it cautiously, peeking inside, and said that it didn't look like a trap, he declared. Magnus, unable to contain his excitement, asked what was inside. Rondo opened the chest, revealing a beautifully crafted sword. He held it up, the blades shimmering with latent power. Magnus commented that as he raised his head, he stated that it was one strong-looking sword. He can feel magic power emanating from it, and it would probably sell for a lot, Rondo added, their eyes wide and amazed. Rigurd, the tank, remained suspicious. Magic power, if they are sure that thing was not a curse. Stop being such a killjoy, Magnus chided. Think about it. They haven't seen many miasma scavengers around lately, and we've been struggling to make easy money. It was a blessing for all their hard work. Rigurd stuttered and reluctantly agreed that he was right. They have been diving until late at night. It must be a blessing. Right about that miasma scavengers, he heard one of them has been hanging out with a beautiful elf woman. Lately, Rigurd mused. That scavenger acts so cocky, Rondo grumbled. Next time they meet him, they will teach him a lesson so he knows what a rude position is. Magnus cursed while he stated. Rigurd glanced back at the treasure chest, feeling uneasy. The sword has an eerie aura. It seems like it's craving to kill. Rude and Alicia strolled through the bustling streets of frontier city Ballona. About my new weapon, Rude began. He was thinking of consulting with a weapon shop owner he knows. They arrived at the weapon shop Miner's Hammer run by the skilled blacksmith Doem. Doem inspected the shattered remnants of Rude's sword, disbelief etched on his face. For a sword, he forged to be shattered like this. Brute strength alone shouldn't have caused such damage. He looked at Rude, his eyes questioning. What did he imbue into the sword? Alicia whispered to Rude if he was going to tell him. Rude nodded, and he knew old man Doem for a long time. He's not one to carelessly spill secrets. He explained everything to Doem. Eating monsters lets you gain their powers. No wonder Rude's powers skyrocketed, Doem remarked. It doesn't seem to surprise him, Alicia noted. Doem laughed. It doesn't matter what he eats as long as it tastes good to him. More importantly, creating a sword that can withstand mana-infused blows will take time. Rude asked if there was anything that he needed. It would be helpful to have some high-quality magic stones, Doem replied. Rude rummaged through his bag, placing several magic stones on the table. He got some here. Doem marveled at a general wizard's Baphomet and even a minotaur's magic stone. Your skills have improved quite a lot, so I am praising Rude. He is happy to hear that from Doam, scratching his head sheepishly. Doam handed Rude a temporary sword. Doam gives the sword to Rude and says do not, under the circumstances, imbue it with magic. Do you hear him? If he breaks this sword too, he will have him compensate for it dearly next time, he said while looking at him seriously. Later, at a beer house, Rude and Alicia were drinking and eating, discussing the day's events. Old Man Doam sure becomes frightening regarding weapons, Rude recalled with a chuckle. Although it was intense, Alicia was glad to have met a friend of Rude as she teased him. I'm sorry for being a loner then, Rude replied. Their laughter was interrupted by 3 adventurers approaching them, the same ones from the labyrinth. Looks like someone's having fun. Do they mind if they join? One of them asked smugly. Alicia and Rude turned to face them. Alicia rudely looks back at them, and then Alicia asks them if they have a problem with them and challenges them to settle it by a drinking contest like adventurers. The sword adventurer, Rondo, gets knocked over onto a table while the mage adventurer, Magnus, taunts him. If he was drinking alone. Magnus then noticed Rondo's sword and recognized it. Suddenly, the sword pulsated with a dark energy, craving blood. Rondo, his eyes glowing red, screamed, "Shut up," and slashed Magnus, who fell to the ground, bleeding. The 2 other adventurers were shocked by the sudden violence. Fascinated, Rondo turned his sword on Alicia, but Rude blocked the attack. Looks like this won't end with just a drinking contest, as Rude said, his voice firm. As chaos erupted in the beer house, Magnus got slashed by Rondo. Rigurd was shocked when Rondo slashed Magnus, and Rondo's eyes glowed with an unearthly fury. Stunned by the sudden turn of events, the adventurers watched in horror. Rondo, driven by a dark force, had become a deadly threat. Rude defense, using his sword while he cursed. What the hell is up with him? Rude thought, bewildered. An adventurer who had been peacefully eating in the bar shouted. What the hell did he think he was doing at a drinking party? And even called Rondo a bastard. Fueled by his fury, he and several other adventurers rushed to subdue Rondo. However, it was far beyond reason. His grip tightened on his sword, and with a vicious snarl, he slashed at the adventurers rushing toward him. The blade moved with deadly precision, cutting through the air and forcing the adventurers to jump back in alarm. A man wearing an apron at the door was the manager holding up a frying fan who went out looking at what was happening in his bar. Alicia stood up and apologized to the manager for what she aimed to do. She needed to destroy the wall to get him out. Her staff glowed with a bright, swirling green energy that crackled and sparked, building in intensity. She was preparing a powerful wind spell that would be strong enough to drive Rondo out of the beer house and away from the others. As she held her wand, she quickly released her greenish spell. A wave of shimmering green energy surged forward, taking the form of a roaring wind that twisted and turned like a living entity. The force of the spell was immense, causing him to crash through the wall of the beer house, splintering it into pieces and landing outside. She then screamed that she would destroy it. Later, she questioned what the hell was up with him. The manager, who is in disbelief where the wall got crashed, Rude, asks what he was up to with Rondo. And Alicia looks outside and sees Rondo got up as if nothing had happened, muttering, "He will kill them all." Rude, observing Rondo, asked Alicia if she held back. Looking at Rondo, who was still standing, Alicia replied that an average adventurer shouldn't be able to stand after those attacks. Rondo bowed, then charged at them, screaming, "He will kill them." Rude, realizing the danger, approached and blocked Rondo's attack. Alicia turned to the other adventurers and asked if anyone could use healing magic and if they should treat the injured. Rude and Rondo's swords clashed again, the sound of metal ringing through the battlefield. Sparks flew with each collision, illuminating the fierce determination in their eyes. Rude, sensing the intense aura emanating from his opponent, quickly used his appraisal skill on Rondo. The results were alarming. Rondo had gone berserk, and his stats were significantly higher than before. Alicia called out to Rude to move aside because she was going all out this time. She prepared a powerful spell, but the sword absorbed it when she cast it at Rondo. Alicia could not believe that the sword had absorbed it. Rondo, with his berserk strength, attacked relentlessly. His movements were wild and unpredictable, each strike infused with raw power. Rude struggled to keep up, parrying and dodging as best he could. The force of each blow sent shockwaves through his arms, and he knew he couldn't sustain this defense for long. Rondo's eyes were wild, almost devoid of reason, consumed by the berserk fury overtaking him. His attacks were a blur, a whirlwind of deadly steel aimed at Rude. Every swing of his sword was backed by an overwhelming force, threatening to break Rude's defenses. That's all for today. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you wish to have another part of this recap, please give us at least 2,000 likes. Please don't forget to comment and subscribe to our channel for more content like this. Until next time.